Imagine a kitchen where the afternoon sun reveals a counter covered in cooling wax paper and the scent of rendered fat. In 1955, snacks were not pulled from plastic bags, but were engineered from the leftovers of the morning baking. For the children of this era, the after-school routine involved a glass of whole milk and a treat made by hand. You are about to enter a world of sugar-dusted bread and fruit leather dried on the windowsill. The afternoon routine in 1955 began with an inspection of the bread box. Because bakery loaves were a staple, the first set of snacks focused on utilizing every slice. Domestic managers regulated the transformation of plain white bread into cinnamon sugar toast. It was understood that heat and fat were the primary vehicles for flavor. Thick layers of room-temperature butter were spread over the surface, followed by a heavy dusting of spice. The children of the house monitored the toaster, waiting for the sugar to caramelize into a brittle, glass-like surface. This was a technical achievement of the breakfast table. Another common option was bread and butter with sugar, a simpler version that required no heat. The application of the granules was supervised to ensure the texture remained gritty against the soft dairy. This served as high-energy fuel designed to last until the evening meal. An older generation might introduce the fried bread method. This involved regulating rendered bacon grease in a heavy iron skillet and placing leftover crusts into the hot fat. It was understood that the bread acted as a sponge for the savory notes of the meat. These salty, crunchy strips were the primary savory crunch of the decade. The heat of the pan was managed to ensure the edges were dark without burning the delicate crumb of the center. The younger girls were often tasked with preparing bread pudding bites. Using the stale heels of the loaf, they supervised the soaking process in a mixture of milk and eggs. It was understood that the oven was a tool for consolidation. The cubes were baked until they were firm enough to be held in a small hand. These were the precursors to modern snack bars, built from the structural remains of yesterday's sandwiches and the morning's dairy. Household managers monitored the milquetoast inventory for the little ones. They regulated the temperature of the liquid on the stove, pouring it over toasted bread until it reached a soft, porridge-like consistency. This was a comfort strategy used during cold winter afternoons. A pinch of nutmeg or a drop of vanilla was added to elevate the flavor profile. It was a liquid-based snack that filled the stomach without requiring expensive or rare ingredients. Finally, honey-dipped crusts provided a natural sweetness. The adults regulated the honey jar, ensuring the sticky liquid was warmed enough to flow over the bread. It was understood that honey was a durable pantry asset. The mess was managed by wrapping the sticky ends in paper. These bread-based snacks represented the foundation of the 1950s snack economy, turning the most basic household staple into a diverse array of physical and sensory rewards. The residents of the neighborhood often shared these methods during community gatherings. They understood that the kitchen was a site of constant resourcefulness. By utilizing every portion of the loaf, they ensured that the food budget remained stable. This was a period of manual dexterity where the simple act of buttering bread was done with a sense of pride. The 1950s kitchen was an environment of zero waste, where even the smallest crumb had a future. Monitoring the heat of the stove was a vital skill for the youth. They learned to balance the flames to achieve the perfect golden brown on their toast. This was a technical education passed down through the generations. The kitchen was a classroom for the senses, where the smell of melting butter signaled the start of a new project. Every snack was a manual labor of love, requiring time and patience that modern processed goods can never truly replicate for the palate. As the afternoon sun shifted, the focus moved toward the next item in the larder. The bread box was only the beginning. The kitchen authority looked at the jars of preserves and the crocks of pickles. They understood that variety was the spice of the mid-century life. They managed the transition from sweet to savory with ease, ensuring that every child had a satisfied appetite before the evening chores began. This was the rhythmic heart of the 1950s home. In 1955, the relationship between the worker and the food was intimate. There were no barcodes to scan or microwave buttons to press. Instead, there was the weight of the silver knife and the texture of the coarse sugar. These snacks provided more than just calories. They provided a sense of security and belonging. To eat a piece of cinnamon toast was to partake in a ritual of the hearth, a physical confirmation that the home was a place of abundance and care. Which of these forbidden Sunday staples would you dare to recreate today? Share your kitchen memories in the comments. The second stage of snack management involved the inventory of the orchard. Families regulated the seasonal cycles of fruit to provide natural sugars. The most common technical snack was the apple ring. Slicing the fruit into thin, circular sections was a standard procedure. It was understood that air and time were the primary tools for preservation. The rings were hung on strings near the warmth of the stove to remove moisture without cooking the flesh. Children monitored the fruit leather drying on the porch. The kitchen authority regulated the boiling of plums or berries into a thick purple pulp. It was understood that a flat surface was required for even dehydration. The mixture was spread over waxed paper, leaving it under the sun to firm into a chewy, concentrated sheet of sugar. This was a manual process of condensation, turning perishable fruit into a stable snack that could be carried in a pocket. An older generation might supervise the celery and cream cheese ritual. They regulated the cleaning of the stalks, removing the tough outer fibers with a knife. It was understood that the hollow center of the plant was a natural delivery system for dairy. The grooves were filled with soft cheese or peanut butter, sometimes adding raisins to create ants on a log. This was a structural snack, combining the crunch of the garden with the proteins of the pantry. The teenagers managed the prune pits and dried apricots. They regulated the storage of these items in glass jars, ensuring they remained in a dark, cool corner of the larder. It was understood that dried fruits were the gold reserve of the snack shelf. These were served in small wooden bowls during the long winter months when fresh produce was unavailable. They provided the fiber and vitamins needed to maintain the health of the school-age youth in 1955. Summer heat required monitoring the cucumber slices in vinegar. The acidity of the brine was regulated with a spoonful of sugar and a dash of salt. It was understood that the cold liquid was a thermal shield against the July sun. The cucumbers were sliced paper-thin so they would absorb the liquid quickly. These were served in ceramic dishes, providing a sharp, hydrating crunch that was a staple of the backyard play sessions after the school hours ended. Pear halves with toppings were a frequent Saturday treat. The home manager supervised the opening of home-canned fruit jars. It was understood that the syrup was a high-value byproduct. A dollop of mayonnaise or a sprinkle of shredded cheddar cheese was placed in the center of the fruit. This was a flavor contrast snack that combined the sweetness of the syrup with the savory notes of the kitchen. It was a sophisticated preparation for a young palate. The garden provided a constant supply of raw carrots and radishes. These were cleaned and kept in cold water to maintain their crispness. The residents understood that the snap of a fresh vegetable was a sensory delight. They managed the inventory of the garden beds with a focus on immediate consumption. Every carrot pulled from the earth was a unit of health. This was the biological foundation of the 1950s youth, built on the soil and the seasonal harvest. Monitoring the ripening of the peaches on the windowsill was a daily task for the children. They understood that the transition from green to gold was a matter of patience. The kitchen authority regulated the use of the fruit, ensuring that none was lost to rot. This was a management of the life cycle of the food. They turned bruised fruit into quick jams or sauces, ensuring that the labor of the trees was honored. The pantry was a living archive of the year. The larder also held jars of pickled watermelon rind. This was the ultimate zero-waste snack. The residents regulated the boiling of the green skin in a spiced vinegar syrup. They understood that the texture would become translucent and sweet. These were served as a side or a quick bite between games. It was a technical transformation of a waste product into a delicacy. This ingenuity was the hallmark of the mid-century home, where nothing was ever thrown away. As the sun dipped lower, the fruit snacks were tucked away, and the focus shifted back to the core proteins. The kitchen was a site of constant movement. The authority looked at the dairy delivery and the eggs from the local farm. They understood that the body required more than just sugar. They managed the transition to the next block of snacks with the same clinical precision. Every bite was part of a larger plan to sustain the energy of the growing family. The third stage of snack management focused on the protein of the icebox. Households regulated the flow of whole milk and heavy cream to create dense, satisfying treats. The most famous was home-churned butter crackers. The process involved shaking a glass jar filled with cream until the fat separated. It was understood that the agitation was a mechanical requirement. Fresh, unsalted butter was spread over plain soda crackers for a rich afternoon bite. A grandmother might manage the cottage cheese and canned peaches bowl. She regulated the portions, ensuring that the child received a balance of dairy and fruit. It was understood that the curds and whey were a vital nutritional asset. The texture was managed by adding a sprinkle of black pepper or a dash of cinnamon. This was a staple of the sturdy growth philosophy of the decade, providing the calcium and energy needed for active play in the yard. The youth of the house monitored the pudding skin. The kitchen authority regulated the cooking of chocolate or vanilla pudding on the stove. It was understood that the surface of the liquid would thicken as it cooled in the air. While modern tastes might differ, the 1950s child viewed the chewy skin as the best part of the treat. Cooling was managed in individual glass ramekins, creating a layered sensory experience of soft cream and firm top for the palate. Mothers supervised the peanut butter and graham cracker sandwich. They regulated the thickness of the spread, ensuring it reached the very edges of the square cracker. It was understood that the dry cracker required a fatty lubricant for easy consumption. The assembly of these mini towers was managed by stacking them 3 or 4 high. This was the high-intensity snack of the mid-century, designed to provide calories for the evening paper route or sports. The cold chicken leg was the primary meat-based snack of the larder. The home manager regulated the leftovers from the Sunday roast. It was understood that cold protein was a convenient and durable option. The legs were kept wrapped in foil in the icebox, ready for a quick, hand-to-mouth meal. This was a snack of utility and strength, teaching the child to appreciate every part of the bird. It was a common sight in the hands of boys playing in the yard. Finally, malted milk balls were a rare but managed treat. The house authority regulated the purchase of malted powder at the local market. It was understood that the powder could be mixed with a small amount of water to create a thick, sweet paste. The rolling of the balls was managed by coating them in cocoa or sugar. These were industrial-style snacks made at home, representing the intersection of modern food science and traditional hand-shaping in the kitchen. The dairy delivery man was a vital link in this protein chain. The residents regulated the standing order for glass bottles of milk with the cream on top. They understood that the fat was a valuable resource for baking and snacking. They managed the inventory of the icebox to ensure that nothing went sour. This was a logistical challenge before the era of modern preservatives. Every bottle was used with a sense of urgency and respect for the cow's labor. Monitoring the temperature of the cream was essential for making the perfect whipped treat. The youth learned to whisk the liquid until it held soft peaks. They understood that overworking the cream would turn it back into butter. This was a lesson in the physics of the kitchen. The resulting foam was dolloped onto slices of pound cake or bowls of berries. It was a cloud-like reward for the day's chores, managed with a light hand and a sense of timing. The pantry also held tins of sardines and crackers. The residents understood that these were high-value protein sources for the older children. They managed the opening of the tins with care, preserving the oil for the family dog. This was an example of the interconnected biology of the home. Every creature had a place in the food cycle. The sardines provided the omega-3s and minerals needed for cognitive development, long before these terms were common. As the evening approached, the dairy snacks were cleared away. The kitchen authority looked at the scrap bin and the remnants of the day's baking. They understood that the final block of snacks would come from the residuals. They managed the transition with a focus on the economy of the hearth. Every calorie was a precious unit of life, and the 1950s home was a masterpiece of nutritional efficiency. The family was ready for the final sweet of the day. The fourth stage of snack management focused on the economy of the scrap. Families regulated the leftover dough from the morning's pie making to create cinnamon roll-ups. It was understood that no calorie should be discarded. The rolling of the pastry scraps was supervised, coating them in butter and spice before baking them alongside the main pie. These were the baker's bonus snacks, highly sought after for their flaky texture and concentrated sweetness. An older generation might manage the sugar cubes and lemon. They regulated the small inventory of the formal tea service. It was understood that a single cube of sugar could be a moment of intense reward. The ritual was managed by dipping the cube into a fresh lemon wedge or a drop of peppermint oil. This was a concentrated sensory snack used as a reward for completing chores. It taught the child the value of small, potent treats in a highly structured day. The teenagers of the house monitored the potato chip crumbs. The kitchen authority regulated the bottom of the tin, where the fragile chips had broken into small shards. It was understood that the salt and oil were still present. The crumbling protocol was managed by mixing the shards with a handful of raisins or peanuts to create a primitive trail mix. This was an inventory recovery snack, ensuring that even the debris of a party was recycled for the youth. Mothers supervised the corn syrup and bread treat. They regulated the bottle of dark syrup, pouring it in a thin stream over a piece of buttered toast. It was understood that the syrup provided an immediate glucose boost. The sogginess factor was managed by serving it quickly before the liquid could dissolve the bread. This was a budget-friendly sweet, common in homes where candy was a rare luxury, but the pantry staples were always available for daily use. Fried cornmeal mush was a heavy, savory snack of the winter. The home manager regulated the boiling of the cornmeal into a thick block. It was understood that the cooling process was required for structural integrity. The slicing of the block was managed by frying the squares in lard until the exterior was gold and the interior remained soft. This was a slow-burning energy source, providing the heat needed to survive the drafty classrooms of the mid-century. Finally, molasses taffy was a project of the weekend. Families regulated the boiling of the black liquid until it reached the softball stage on the thermometer. It was understood that the pulling process required the collective muscle of the household. The physical labor of stretching the candy was managed until it turned pale and brittle. These were the social snacks, created through shared effort and enjoyed over several days of outdoor play in the neighborhood. The scrap bin was also a source of pie crust cookies. The residents regulated the cutting of the dough into stars and hearts. They understood that the visual appeal was as important as the taste. They managed the dusting of colored sugar over the shapes before they hit the oven. This was a creative outlet for the kitchen authority. Every small shape was a token of affection for the children, turning a waste product into a personalized and beautiful treat. Monitoring the hardening of the molasses was a technical challenge. The youth learned to pull the candy with buttered hands to prevent sticking. They understood that the air was a participant in the process, cooling the sugar as it was stretched. This was a lesson in the material science of the kitchen. The resulting taffy was wrapped in wax paper and stored in tins. It was a durable sweet that provided a long-lasting chew for the long walk to school. The pantry also yielded popcorn with nutritional yeast, or simple salt. The residents regulated the popping of the kernels in a heavy pot with a lid. They understood that the sound was the indicator of the process. They managed the distribution into brown paper bags for the evening movie or the backyard fort. This was a high-volume, low-cost snack that provided the bulk needed to satisfy a hungry group of children. It was a communal and joyful event. As the day came to a close, the residual snacks were put away. The kitchen authority looked at the icebox one last time. They understood that the final innovations would come from the cold. They managed the transition with a focus on the technology of the era. The 1950s was a time of shifting from the manual to the electric, and the snacks reflected this change. Every treat was a bridge between the old ways and the new world of the mid-century modern. The final stage of snack management involved the regulation of the cold. Households in 1955 regulated the limited space of the icebox to create frozen delights. The most common was the frozen juice cup. The adult in charge supervised the pouring of grape or orange juice into small paper cups. It was understood that structural stability required a wooden stick. The freezing process was managed, providing the child with a slow-melting and hydrating treat. A grandmother might manage the root beer float during a Sunday visit. She regulated the ratio of vanilla ice cream to carbonated liquid. It was understood that the foam was the primary sensory goal. The eruption of the bubbles was managed by pouring slowly down the side of the glass. This was a celebratory snack, marking the end of the week. It represented the marriage of the modern drugstore soda fountain and the traditional home dairy service in 1955. The youth of the house monitored the chocolate milk swirl. The kitchen authority regulated the cocoa powder and the sugar, mixing them into a thick syrup. It was understood that the cold milk required vigorous stirring for integration. The visual experience was managed by allowing the chocolate to swirl in patterns before the final mixing. This was the liquid fuel of the 1950s athlete, provided after the Little League game or the afternoon bike ride. Mothers supervised the ginger ale and sherbet punch. They regulated the small scoops of lime or raspberry ice, floating them in a bowl of sparkling soda. It was understood that the melting transition created a creamy, effervescent drink. Service in small punch cups was managed, making the children feel part of the adult social world. This was a snack of refinement and fun, used for birthdays or the conclusion of a successful school term for the youth. Iced tea with mint was the primary hydration snack of the porch. The home manager regulated the brewing of the tea leaves, adding a handful of fresh herbs from the garden. It was understood that atmospheric cooling was enhanced by the scent of the mint. The ice cubes were managed as a precious resource in some homes. This was a sensory anchor for the 1950s child, associated with the sound of the lawnmower and the shade of the backyard elm trees. Finally, the Orange Julius-style whip was a modern innovation. Families regulated the use of the new electric blender. It was understood that the aeration created a light, frothy texture. The mixture of juice, egg white, and sugar was managed to create a cloud-like snack. This was the future of the kitchen in 1955, signaling the transition from the manual scrap economy to the era of the high-speed processed treat that would soon dominate the world. The electric refrigerator was the crown jewel of the mid-century kitchen. The residents regulated the placement of the Jell-O molds in the coldest shelves. They understood that the setting of the gelatin was a matter of temperature and time. They managed the inclusion of fruit cocktail or shredded carrots to create a structural salad. This was a snack that signaled a modern status, using an industrial product to create a colorful and wiggly sensory delight. Monitoring the frost in the freezer compartment was a constant chore. The youth learned to scrape the ice to make snow cones with fruit syrup. They understood that the ice was a seasonal miracle in the middle of summer. This was a management of the transition of states. The freezing water provided the base for a cold and sweet experience. It was a technical mastery of the environment, turning the cold of the machine into the joy of the afternoon. The pantry also held the new instant cocoa and cake mixes. The residents understood that these were the harbingers of a new convenience. They managed the preparation with a sense of excitement. Every box opened was a promise of a perfect result. This was the beginning of the end for the manual scrap economy. The 1950s child stood at the crossroads of history, enjoying the hand-shipped taffy alongside the factory-made beverage of the future. As the lights in the kitchen were dimmed, the final inventory was complete. The authority looked at the satisfied faces of the youth. They understood that the snacks of the day had done their job. They managed the cleanup with the same efficiency as the preparation. The 1950s was a decade of transition, and the kitchen was its primary laboratory. Every homemade snack was a testament to the skill and the heart of the residents who built the era. The 1950s kitchen was a masterpiece of creativity and resourcefulness, turning the forbidden luxury of sweetness into a Sunday ritual. Do you think you could manage your family's hunger using only the ingredients from a mid-century pantry? Comment on the recipe that surprised you the most and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next dive into the hidden domestic arts of the past.